I'm Afshan Ratansi, and we're going underground in the week of this year's World Environment Day. Coming up on the show, will climate change mean the complete destruction of this country within 80 years? We talk to its former leader, Mohammed Waheed Hassan, about why the Maldives is emblematic of all the most serious issues facing the planet ahead of elections, attracting the attention of India, China, NATO, and the EU. And fashion icon Vivienne Westwood goes to Downing Street as UK minority government leader Theresa May ploughs on with her plans to frack the British countryside for unsustainable energy. All this and more coming up in today's Going Underground. But first, straight to our top story in a nation that arguably encapsulates the fragility of the world. From trade wars to carbon emissions, the Maldives. Its 1,200 islands are famous for dream holidays, but today it's in the eye of a storm. On Monday, deposed leader Mohammed Nasheed criticised Chinese influence in the region. This after Britain's Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson voiced concerns. To some, it appears that NATO nations want Nasheed in and President Abdullah Yameen out at elections this autumn. Well, joining me now is the Maldives' former president, Mohammed Waheed Hassan. He's just been recognised by the Centre for International Competitiveness and Research as a member of its 2018 Power Brands Hall of Fame. Former President, welcome to Going Underground. Right now, what is the strategic importance of your nation? Because we're hearing all manner of things from press releases from different foreign offices, whether it be in the EU, NATO nations, whether it be from China, and whether it be from India.
You see, Maldives is strategically located in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And so anyone who wants to have influence in the Indian Ocean region would want Maldives on their side. So this is why Maldives is important, but it survived for thousands of years without being involved in any global strategic conflict. So I believe that Maldives is going to continue to be a peaceful place.
1,200 islands. I want to get to those specifics a bit later, but let's just take us back to arguably the beginning of the most current concerns. Take us back to the night of February the 7th, or was it the day of February the 7th, 2012, and the coup, and how you became president. What happened then?
Yes, I was vice president at the time, and there was mounting opposition against the president for various reasons, economic and political. President came in a coalition together with me and other political parties, but this coalition fell apart, and so many of the coalition partners turned against him. And so the mounting opposition...
And that's Nasheed?
That's Nasheed.
Who's currently trying...
Yes, to
the
get
Electoral
back.
Commission said he can't go for September's election.
Yes, he's trying to come back. But, he made a mistake, fundamental mistake, in arresting a serving judge, Chief Justice of the Criminal Court, without any, the proper legal processes. So that is haunting him today, because he's now under a sentence for having abducted a serving judge. The Constitution doesn't allow this kind of acts anymore.
Now living in Sri Lanka.
And now living in Sri Lanka, and also...
Because he was seen as a hero of the environment, but of course what you're alluding to there is that these 1,200 islands, we haven't got time for the whole history of how Islam managed to conquer all that over centuries, the critical conflict between judiciary and the executive.
Yes, we got a new constitution in 2008, which for the first time in Maldives guaranteed fundamental rights of the people, and also for the first time separated the three powers of government. My sense of it is that we came out with a constitution that is mostly theoretical, without a base in the practice of politics in the Maldives, a country that has gone through years and years of authoritarian rule with patronage playing a very important role. And now suddenly you have a constitution that looks like, you are in the UK or US. In fact, it was a hybrid constitution with elements of an executive presidency and the parliament system, Westminster type parliamentary system. So that was, inconsistent. And so, you have a country where the president was all-powerful and so on, and suddenly his powers have been taken away.
Because anyone from the global elite lucky enough to visit the Maldives would say, you arrive on one of these 1,200 islands, it's a five-star hotel, the manager is basically the dictator, and the head of personnel is the sheriff. Doesn't seem to be any law there at all.
No, Maldives, the resorts in Maldives operate very independently, and they have, all the room to function effectively as 5-star, 7-star hotels. So there's really very little or no interference from the government. But you see, Maldives is an old society. You know, people have lived there for over almost 2,000 years. You know, the written history goes back to hundreds of years. So there are cultures that are already there. That takes a little bit of time to evolve and adapt to new systems. So, I mean, I become president, but I don't have the powers of a king. So if people want things from me, I can't just, you know, hand out money. There are systems now in place. But that's one of the issues.
But of course, it could become a very, very rich country. It's interesting because when the coup happened, Indian media were condemning you, as far as I understood it, or some elements of it. The U.S. Assistant Secretary of State at the time, Robert Blake, said it was okay for you to become president. I don't have what Beijing said at the time. Did you listen to all these different?
I was actually quite busy to, you know, listen because I wasn't at all prepared for it, and therefore it was.
But if the United States didn't want you to be president,
well, I think the United States knew exactly what was going on in Maldives. You know, they were following the situation, so it wasn't really a coup in the you know, traditional sense.
And the U.S.
But the U.S. has a military base, you know, south of Maldives in Diego Garcia in the Chagos archipelago.
It's technically leased from the British. Diego Garcia.
Yes, that's what.
I don't know what the Ministry of Defense would say about that.
Yeah.
But so when it comes to foreign interference, then as you became president, very soon afterwards there were voices. I think you yourself were saying there's a degree of interference coming from the Commonwealth, and there was a threat to leave the Commonwealth. What was going on then?
Well, you see, at that time there were countries that were calling for immediate elections, but you know, the president in Maldives under the new constitution don't have the powers to call for an election. It's like the American system. The president, for any reason, leaves the office, the vice president completes the term. And the situation in Maldives was quite difficult at the time. And also to...
A lot of leaders might have just said at that point, go to London and to Washington and say, I'll do whatever you tell me, and maybe take a big loan from the IMF. You didn't.
No, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. You know, we tried to manage the situation, and I didn't arrest people. You know, Nasheed was never arrested. He was free to continue to do his political work. And so it was a difficult situation. I tried to manage as best as I can. And then we had elections, difficult elections. But nevertheless, it was free and fair elections.
They were difficult for you. There was some controversy because you hired Baroness Scotland, Gordon Brown's Attorney General?
We had her to advise us on how to deal with particularly some of our, you know, international partners, because there was a misunderstanding there. You know, they thought that, you know, how come this very popular guy who's, you know, first democratically elected president, you know, suddenly resigns.
Mr. Nasheed.
And then the next day he comes out and says it's a coup and that I held a gun at his head. I mean, it was too much for people to, you know, deal with. And so...
this is very, very indigenous. This isn't some CIA-backed coup.
No.
This is to do with structural changes within...
Yes, there were people who were unhappy with the way things were going, and the opposition, because, you know, a lot of the coalition partners had now gone on to the opposition. They were coming out on the streets, and the religious element further inflated it. And in December of, I think it was 2011, there was a huge demonstration in Maldives against the government. You know, that was really a turning point for people.
Were you conscious then of outside forces? I know you hired some pretty controversial PR firms. Tourism so important in the Maldives as a for foreign exchange. Were you very conscious as president?
I was very conscious that we had to maintain, we have to maintain stability, because tourism is the lifeline of the country. If it stops, then people will stop overnight. You know? So this is why I thought it was really important to try to calm down the situation, you know, and be as tolerant as possible. And I formed a government of national unity. I invited all the political parties to come.
Of all the PR firms, why pick on is it called Ruder Finn?
Somebody came up with the suggestion of, you know, this company, and we hired. We didn't know who actually to hire, you know.
You didn't Google them.
You know.
Because they did Israel's El Al, which caused the element of disquiet, say, against the population. And then, of all the things to do, you choose China for a contract.
You know what?
Over India.
You know what? The first loan agreement with Chinese Exim Bank was done by Nasheed himself.
Well, I meant the infrastructure project, actually, rather than the loan.
Yeah, the loan was for infrastructure projects. It was for...
The airport upgrade?
No, it was for housing projects. The first $1 billion was taken from Chinese Exim Bank by Nasheed for housing projects. Okay? And then later, we took some more money. For this government, actually, took money for the...
Because I'm not criticizing you for doing this.
Yes.
I'm just saying I can imagine what was happening in Whitehall here or in Washington.
But it is a little...
Or Brussels.
Yeah, I don't say that he was wrong in taking that money. We needed the money because we didn't have the money to be able to meet the rising expectations of people in a democratic society, newly democratic country. People want housing. They want sewerage.
So why is he saying that somehow it's become the People's Republic of the Maldives?
This is misleading. This is misleading. And I think Maldives' economy is strong. Maldives will pay its debts. And I don't think we will fall into a situation where China will be able to twist our arms because of unpaid loans.
How does a developing world nation leader today, especially in the Indian Ocean, let alone it could be, of course, in the Red Sea or perhaps in the Caribbean, manage to pivot between these huge trading blocs, which are, in effect, actually at the moment in a global trade war?
We are caught in between big powers in the region. India on one side and China on the other side. I mean, we wish both India and China were, able to, resolve their differences and not have small countries like Maldives get caught in between. I mean, it's very difficult for small countries, not just for Maldives, but also for other developing and small countries in East Asia and Africa. But we need the development funds from somewhere. And unfortunately now, UK or US are not providing that kind of development financing. And so many countries, not just Maldives, are being forced to go to China because those funds are available from China. And when you have a democratic country where people's aspirations are high, expectations have suddenly gone up. The constitution says you are entitled to, you have a right to housing, you have a right to safe drinking water. Then the government is forced to do something about it.
Former President, I'll stop you there. More from former President of the Maldives, Mohammed Waheed Hassan, after the break. Fashion designer Vivienne Westwood in Downing Street to protest UK government energy plans that critics say will cause earthquakes in Britain, let alone lead to global destruction. All this and more coming up in part 2 of Going Underground. Welcome back. We're still with the former president of the Maldives, Mohammed Waheed Hassan. Mohammed, why Mr. Nasheed was so popular was his famous demonstration of climate change and the power of climate change. I mean, what is your opinion about the latest scientific evidence that suggests your country will disappear within 80 years?
Unfortunately, that's a reality we have to face. But in the meantime, in the immediate near future, we are going to be experiencing rough weather. A third of the Maldives Islands are being eroded severely. And, as a politician, you go around the islands, and number one demand today is help us protect the beaches. Just recently, one of the southern islands, which is the only island atoll in the world, it's called Formula. It is below the sea level, but it has a rim around it that protects the ocean from coming into the country. But that is eroding now. And just last month, they had major flooding, and they have 3 freshwater bodies on the island. They are all contaminated now because of this. So Maldives is threatened, absolutely. And it's
these
not
are long-term trends, because
Yeah.
some have suspected that this has been a desire for aid, and that actually some islands they're getting bigger.
We also have the technology to be able to expand islands and reclaim islands. There are deposits of sand in the ocean that can be taken out and for building and raising islands, and that we are doing quite successfully.
But of course that technology is infamous in China, which is doing all sorts of climate change activities, the increasing solar and so on, whereas in Washington, President Trump obviously has dissolved the Paris climate change agreement. Do you think developing nations also will turn away from Washington because of this key issue of climate change when it comes to the economics of developing world nations?
Oh, I think people are not stupid. They know what's going on in climate change, and people believe in it now. Paris Accord was difficult. It took a long time to get to Paris Accord. And so, U.S., it's unfortunate that they have, pulled out of it. But most of the nations are going to go ahead with the accord. And, India, China, all of them are investing heavily in renewables. They have set high targets for adopting renewable energy. So I'm optimistic. I think together we will be able to deal with this issue of climate change.
How invented is this competition between India and China over the Maldives, especially given that they are obviously in the BRICS movement, the new trade bloc? Do you think to an extent it suits the European Union and other NATO nations that there is this fight between these two massive powers?
It is definitely not healthy for Maldives. India and China may have had their differences over other issues for a long time, border issues and so on.
We now have an Indian Prime Minister who speaks fluent Mandarin.
Yes, but they're also cooperating on technology, on economic affairs and so on, and trade. So, it's unfortunate that a small country like Maldives is seen to be taking sides when it asks for assistance from either of those countries. As I said, this is a problem facing many small countries, and I go to Singapore quite often. I think they have the same kind of difficulty, caught between big powers. But that's something, I think that heads of state from small countries need to also talk to each other and, compare notes and see, how do you deal with it? This was your first question. How do you deal with this kind of competition? And I don't think there are any easy answers to that.
But ironic that for those critics of Washington foreign policy in Latin America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, it could indeed be the United States that destroys your country, not through any kind of foreign intervention, but because it fosters climate change.
I hope not, because, the private sector in the U.S. is not going along with President Trump's policies. Many of them have said, they will buy it. So I'm not so desperate and hopeless. I think United States also has a key role to play, and especially, technologically, the United States is able to contribute enormously to new technologies, renewable energy in particular.
And just finally, I must ask this because I know this goes out in some of the Maldives islands, some of those 1,200 islands. What about trade union rights and rights of workers in all these different hotel complexes? Because how on earth does the central government in Mali keep tabs on worker rights when it seems like big multinational hotel chains are running those islands?
Yeah. It is very much self-regulated now. We have the Council for Labor Affairs, which listens to complaints that come from
Can it really visit all these disparate islands?
Yes, you can. They have the power to visit any resort and see to...
and shut it down.
Yeah. Unfortunately, because of the geography, many of our workers have to stay away from their families. Their families are on their inhabited islands, while they have to come and live on the resort island. So that's a huge disadvantage, but many resorts allow them to go back to their resorts periodically. But still the pay is so good in the resorts. Most of them prefer to work in resorts even over going to fishing.
Former President, thank you.
Thank you.